Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this press room of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center who watch us online. I'm Victoria Zabian. I'm director of the press center. And today we're discussing the following topic: Ukraine in the center of geopolitical standoff, Russian ultimatum and reaction of the West. First of all, some organizational demands. You may watch us on the UCMC website, on YouTube channel, and also the stream is available in English language. At the beginning, I would like to make up a short introduction. The past week witnessed a lot of diplomatic matches and discussions at the high level, and we decided that it is important to provide some reflection and discussion on the results of these topics. That's why we invited the leading opinion makers and analysts in this area. Also, we would like to have a glimpse at Kazakhstan events in this context. So today we have three issues to discuss. What are the results of the diplomatic track in restriction of the Russian aggression, how to decrease tensions and the conflict, and what will be the long-term outcomes in the external and internal dimensions. And today we have very experienced analysts and opinion makers, Ms. Ivana Klimpur-Sensance, as Member of Parliament. Then we have Mr. Danilo Lubkivsky, Director of the Kiev Security Forum, Deputy Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Ukraine in 2014, Mr. Volodymyr Griska, Director of the Center of Russian Research and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine in 2028. Then Mr. Vitaly Portnikov, who is a writer, journalist, and writer, and Mr. Valery Chale, Chairman of the Board of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine, and primarily the floor goes to Ms. Ivana Klimpur-Sensance. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our today's discussion, and thank you to the UCMC for initiating this discussion. Actually, I feel that this is going to be just the beginning of a series of discussions on this topic, which will begin soon after. I will start from a sort of provocation. We should not start with the results of that diplomatic meetings because we did not expect to see a lot of results. This was not even called negotiations. That was called a series of dialogues or the continuous one dialogue between NATO and Russia. During those meetings, Russia predictably behaved like a hooligan and in a rather rough way, and insisted on the review of the security regime that had been existent for a long time in Europe. But of course, the West cannot take the same style of communication and decrease the style of behavior in the same way that Russia did. Simultaneously, we all understand that Putin is driven with an ambition to enter the history of Russia. And the year 2020 marks a centenary from the formation of the Soviet Union. And during the latest years, we witnessed how he tried to continue his lateral annexation of the adjacent territories. This was clearly seen in Belarus, in Azerbaijan and Armenia, in Kazakhstan, and all those attempts and after occupation of Crimea, and the situation in the Ardlo may become a trigger of the new world war. What we lack today to contribute to this response, which we would like to see, we lack the proactive, preventive actions, and we observe how the West tries to make some steps, but at the same time we clearly understand that the Kremlin is ready to not respond only in the case of a very strong position. That's why we believe that occupation of Ukraine may not start from the clear offensive or from shells or air bombs, but it may start from cyber attacks, it may start from provocations in major industrial cities, from attacks on the sea, etc. And multiple cyber attacks prove that the Russian Federation had accustomed to exist in the situation of that hybrid provocations and is now well experienced in that, while the West is now only at the stage of mastering this this art. I do not like the expression of democratic recession once suggested by Larry Diamond, but actually there's an expression which I do not like. 100% is used by the Freedom House and many other institutions, and this is the expression which they use to characterize the process, the situation in the United States or around the United States during the last several decades. And now actually we observe the weighting of the Western values, and in this context analysis of the latest week suggests that during this week the United States and other Western allies had clearly articulated their position. On the other hand, I do not see equally well-articulated position from France and Germany. And in order to stop that democratic recession, which I mentioned, something more is needed from the West, and let us discuss this today. It seems to me that we might insist that without seeing clear position from France or Germany, we cannot understand what's going on. Moreover, we do not see the clear position of Ukraine. Whether we are happy about what was negotiated without us, or we may allow that, or we are ready to repeal the offensive very eagerly and energetically. And what we lack is a position of Ukrainian officials, this clear position, clear standoff. And Mr. Yermak recently mentioned that the assault on Ukraine would become a verdict for NATO. I do not think that this is the best way to engage or to appeal to engagement to our Western allies. Unfortunately, when we have a furor on the borders, our internal furor do not try to mobilize the society inside Ukraine. At this very moment, we have to ensure the strength and readiness of the armed forces in Ukraine. We should mobilize our reserves. We have to build up our territorial defense. These are all the steps which we clearly lack in our internal policy as of today. These all measures which I mentioned would strongly back up our foreign policy and demonstrate the external world that our position is strong. And here we can contribute by uniting forces of different communities inside the country. We may recollect how we build up our unity when we wanted to defend our freedom and democracy inside the country. Thank you very much. Now the microphone goes to Mr. Lubkiewski. I would like to remind to our viewers that you may ask your questions below the stream, and at the end I will ask these questions to our speakers.
Good morning, Happy New Year, and I would like to thank Valery Chali, the ambassador, for this initiative of UCMC, for the initiative of this conversation, because this is timely, and such dialogue, such discussions, we should have more of them, and we should follow this line. I support nearly everything that was said by Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze. I believe we all think alike. We share these assessments. I would like to say several things from me. First of all, I believe that this is evident. We cannot make final conclusions because it's not timely at the moment, because we are witnessing only the process of the ending of the first act of drama that happened at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. We may outline several key points. I would like to focus on them. First, about Russian line. We are witnessing the break of foreign policy of Putin, and they declared some big goals, but they were not able to reach them. And the rhetoric and other signs of behavior and trace of behavior of Russian diplomacy carried out by Lavrov and Grushko and military core of Russian Federation shows that one of the main recipients of such behavior is the domestic Russian audience. So this first act is completed with some dividends for Putin's regime, and these dividends are based on calculations that this aggressive military rhetoric of restoration of Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, and this was mentioned by Ivanka, that it is connected with the date of 100 years of establishment of the Soviet Union, and this coincides with the dominating opinions in the Russian Federation. This makes the situation more dangerous, even more dangerous than before this week. And Putin has a lot of scenarios, his responses to further actions and provocations connected with Ukraine and foreign countries. On the whole, I believe that one of the tasks, technical tasks of Russians was to demonstrate that they may speak with the West like this, and this rhetoric may be used, in inverted commas, concerning foreign countries and the leader of the Western world, I mean the US. In this context, we should monitor also Chinese track negotiations that are ongoing between Moscow and Beijing, an expected visit of Putin to Beijing this year in February. About foreign countries, we see several important aspects. US President used the situation in order to consolidate the West. This is a very interesting turn from what we see now. This is real consolidation, real attempt to understand each other and to unite the Western world around renewed rhetoric about common values and tasks. Practically, Putin helped Ukrainians to become Ukrainians, and now he helps the West to become the West, the United West. Another thing is political will, whether the West is ready for experiment and marathon that is provided by Putin. This is a big question. The answer was expected. We believe that this answer will be provided by the West, and we see that the West is ready to adhere to these standards. About Ukraine, we know that decision was not taken about sanctions against Nord Stream 2, and this is great disillusion, and this should force Ukrainian official power to express their disillusionment with this. I would like to say some optimistic things, if you allow me. I believe, and this is also about 100 years perspective, even bigger perspective. Now Ukraine is more defended than 200 or 400 or 800 years ago. Ukraine is not the full-fledged member of NATO and the European Union, but it is now restored in the mental map of the world. So we are fighting for Ukraine as a nation and for the civilized relations, and also we fight for values, and we should properly correspond to this. And here we have an important aspect. Now it's time for high diplomatic efforts of Ukraine. We should have the negotiations between the ambassadors, and the ambassadors should use this opportunity to remind about Ukraine in all European and Euro-Atlantic capitals, to use the situation and to speak about Ukrainian agenda. So now we have time to speak about our subjectivity, about our agency, about which our top leaders say a lot. Now we do not see this, and there are only some attempts we witness. We should replace PR diplomacy and Twitter messaging. We should carry out real diplomacy, and part of this real diplomacy is public diplomacy. So now we have time to speak with the world. Your initiative is really important, and the initiatives of other structures are of importance that support global discussion with our Western partners to speak about Ukrainian agenda. And also, there should be unique activity of the president of Ukraine. I believe he was elected by many people due to this. I believe that official Kiev should do a lot, and this is not done. There may be different scenarios before us. Some of them are lethal, and some scenarios are minor or hybrid ones. We should be psychologically ready for any scenario, and this is the task for the head of the state, to speak openly and not only to thank society. He should speak about what may happen. Of course, this may negatively influence his rating. And the situation we face, it may bring some negative results. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Kuleba, said that do not take or reject ultimatums of Putin. The situation of lack of peace or war, it may play against our interests. This means that neither Ukrainian power nor our Western partners have the right for silent excuse concerning the NATO course. So for Ukrainian power, this issue should be of existential movement. This is the matter of survival. This is the matter of constant struggle. And here Russians show a wonderful example how they enforce their interests. This is in inverted commas, of course, because we understand that they are imperialists and militarists. We should insist on our interests. This is about joining NATO together with Georgia and Moldova, and also to join European Union, and also we should invest in our defense. We should put a lot of money into this area. So these are the main aspects I would like to mention. Now we give the floor to our next speaker to ask him about the activity of foreign partners, Mr. Vladimir Agrisko.
After what was said, I have not so much to say. Who there? Not wishing to be ironical, I should say that we have heard rather deep and serious analysis. I would point out only to some aspects which I believe to be important. There is such discipline as a comparative history when the scholars try to observe different events, parallel events at the cross-section of history. I listened to the interventions of the U.S. representative, then the deputy minister of Russia, of different worlds. That is what I have seen in all those interventions. On some speakers made an adequate review of the situation, current situation, from the realistic point of view. On the other hand, listening to professional diplomats who represented Russia, Misters Ryabkov and Grushko are professional diplomats, not only propagandists, and they are experts with profound diplomatic background, and these are not mere propagandists who simply read the nonsense which they get from Moscow. And listening to such experts with profound diplomatic experience, you keep asking yourself a question: whether they are sincerely, whether they are sincere, whether they trust what they say, or alternatively, this is intentional propaganda similar to the old Soviet propaganda from 1970s, 1980s. Listening to Mr. Grushko at his press briefing, I was simultaneously married and saddened. The level of discussion when he stated that Ukraine threatens Russia, and the case that he provided when back in 1960s Cuba had deployed or agreed to deploy the Soviet missiles. The Soviet Union and the United States later came to agreement about those missiles. I believe that this is extremely cynical statement. And for me, this is a sign that we find ourselves in a situation when the world is at the edge of extreme danger of new war. On the other hand, the trigger might be in this wide flight of Russian inadequacy, and this inadequacy should be brought to terms with real life, so to say. The United States Congress yesterday had published the draft of new sanctions targeting the Russian Führer in the first place, and the Russian Federation responded immediately that all that was just just nonsense, that these were just not true, and Russia just wanted to secure, to make the world more secure. This is just a logic of a tiny criminal who tries to play on the situation, so to say, and to speculate on the senses of people. And when we recollect the statements of Mr. Ryabkov, statement about the response to technology novelties, what will be done in this area. For example, the Russian Federation stated that they are ready to deploy their missiles on Cuba and in Venezuela. What I want to say, actually, I would like to warn my colleagues against self-satisfaction and assumptions that we should be self-content and at the same time, I clearly see the signs that in Moscow, the officials started to take the perspective of sanctions seriously and started to take seriously the promise of the United States and NATO that they are ready to apply very severe sanctions. And I believe that this process of awakening is gaining more articulated features. Perhaps someday we will even install a monument to Mr. Putin at the border between Ukraine and Russia, because we should be thankful to Mr. Putin, who mobilized our patriotism, who mobilized our people to the defense of the motherland. And thus, this Führer will come to Russian history as a person who brought Russia to economic collapse, to poverty, to confrontation with the immediate neighbors. In this situation, I believe that our diplomats should change the focus and should find a new approach to our interaction with our Western colleagues, especially in what is related to our capability to defend ourselves. In 1990s, Ukraine was deprived from such a way of deterrence of the enemies as a nuclear weapon, and this was done under pressure of two countries of Russia and the United States. And this happened, and let's put this aside, but this created a situation in which we can raise the issue that in the violence of the Budapest Memorandum, we have all the rights to bring back these methods of deterrence. This could be done in two ways, either to revive nuclear weapons and the capacity to produce it and have it, or to get more conventional weapons and equipment to be able to defend ourselves. And we should bring back this capacity to deter any aggressor. We want to defend ourselves against Russian aggressors. We keep hearing you are not the NATO ally. Okay, we're not the NATO ally. Then provide us with the means how to repeal the aggression. So this proactive position, which we are discussing today, should be based on creativity. And this creativity should be clearly demonstrated in very specific statements and suggestions which we bring on the table. I'm not a fatalist, and I do not believe that the Russian Federation, despite the position of the Führer, would make the steps towards the end of the Russian Federation itself. The bombarding of any Ukrainian cities would lead not to simple expression of concern from the West, but this would result in more decisive steps. At the same time, we should devote much more attention to the cyberspace, because the hybrid war is inherently focused on the cyberspace. And this brings me to a recommendation. Let us think about defense of not of Eastern Ukraine, but also about defense of Western Ukraine in this context. And another message which I would like to send to those people who stay in the top positions today, that they have to pay attention, very close attention to the cybersecurity. They have implemented some recommendations, but not all of them. And I nevertheless hope that we will find a fine cage for the Russian bear to place her in it. So the question about the outcomes of that diplomatic week is number one, and number two, that the past week suggests that not so much depend on Ukraine, whether this is intentional impression which is intently formed. Yes, you are absolutely right, because here not so much depend on Ukraine, and here much will depend what will be the strong response from the West, because from military point of view, Ukrainian forces could not be compared to the Russian strength. Of course, we are able to fight, but unless and by the moment when the air forces of Russia are involved And in case of Air Force involvement, everything in Ukraine would be finished in several weeks. By the way, we deal here with a society which does not want war but wants peace. After the first phase of Ukrainian occupation, I mean occupation of Crimea and Donbass, this proves that all two elections proved that the majority of population votes for politicians who are ready to negotiate with Russia. Petro Poroshenko realized that more quickly after election, or Zelensky perhaps has not realized this even now. We are not Israeli. We could not compare it with the situation with Sharon. We are in Ukraine, and if Russia stops at the eastern borders, if we speak about partisan war, guerrilla war, we understand that in in eastern Ukraine, Russia would not see any suppression and any resistance. In Kazakhstan, we witnessed how the law enforcement officers were ready to fight against their own people. I may remind you, 1986, nobody here tried to organize public riots and revolt against communist authorities, while in Almaty in that year, a lot of social riots happened. We should not deceive ourselves. Please do not think that Putin is an idiot and people who surround him do not predict the outcomes of their actions. I am sure that in Ukraine, nobody expected that Western countries would get a sort of that ultimatum publicly. Such things as ultimatums are usually sent quietly and secretly. The message that you should grant us that and provide us with guarantees that Ukraine and Georgia would never become NATO members. You may not pronounce that loudly, but you should guarantee this to us secretly. But what had Russia made? We demand that you bow to us and kiss our shoes, and you should do this collectively without such official homage of our president. We would start the war. So this position only for me means that Putin is planning something. He has some expectations, and here I recollect the red lines of Russia about Ukraine. First, non-accession of Ukraine to NATO. The second red line, impossibility of bilateral contacts between Ukraine and NATO. And the third red line was non-involvement of Western trainers and advisors in the East, because this would actually mean that this would be a direct conflict between Western military and the Russia. And Actually, they had stated that they are present in eastern Ukraine, and they do not wish to be involved in direct military conflict with NATO in the east of Ukraine. And now we have in a situation when we do not know what they plan. We're not sure whether he has a clear schedule, which says or clear agenda. First, we offer the ultimatum, then we breach the border of Ukraine, etc. I do not think that they have this agenda, and that's why nobody can predict what may happen. Mr. Sullivan promised to publish the plan which Russia has against Ukraine, but I believe this will be only one possible option out of 50 other options, optional plans, which this U.S. resident secretly got in Moscow. But for example, here you should keep in mind the nature of Russian people. They're Russian people who work not simply in chaos. They produce a lot of options and then try to choose the least risky option out of 35 possible plans. And he will choose the least risky plan, and that is what we will observe in nearest future. The spectrum of possible options is broad. From hybrid provocations to the slow dialogue, and what we may expect from the West. In this situation, the Western countries would not make decisions, clear decisions, strong decisions against Russia. And in this situation, uncertain situation, we may temporarily win because in the situation of uncertainty, we have some space for maneuver because the further Russia goes, the more decisive should be the steps from the West and to prompt development of events may result in casualties and a lot of casualties at the front. Against the serious background of economic crisis, energy crisis, social destabilization, which will be steered up by Russian Federation. And this is again against the background of Ukrainian authorities who are mainly non-competent. By the way, we may expect that the major wars will happen in the supermarkets and the prices on foodstuff would skyrocket. We may expect that the situation will be destabilized. In this situation, the country would need strong leadership and competent leadership, and we lack this competent leadership very much. Mr. Charlie, the floor is yours. Maybe you would like to respond to what was said.
Розраховую на
So I'm expecting 4 questions. That's why I won't bring conclusions. I will tell my opinion about scenarios and the role of Ukraine, like you asked me in your question. So why these discussions appeared? Mr. Sherman said that this is a dialogue, these are discussions. They appeared in conditions when Russia put an ultimatum concerning consideration of the results and reviewing the results of the Cold War between Russia and the Western world. And Russia, concerning its military forces, it reinforced and they built authoritarian state, and they would like to reconsider the results, and they use this time to bring optimum results for them. And the West understands that Russia will lose the achievements in midterm prospect, and they should preserve their power. And after events in Kurdistan, we understand that no Security Council decisions or other things will work in authoritarian countries. These presidents, they will hold power to the end. And isolation from the world and their own game seems an option and scenario for them. Putin and others, they do not fight for recognition of the world. They do not need to speak about values. They say that they are equal because they are really powerful, and power now prevails over law. And that's why institutions are so weak, and they want to speak on the US. They show disrespect to European Union, and we should be more supported, especially with weapons. And also they speak about countries of former USSR, and they say that in this world there is only Russia and the US, and of course China, but we do not speak now about China, we are speaking about European security. And also there is crisis of European security. This is the deepest crisis from times of the Cold War, and Europe is really close to the real war, and this is not now only about Ukraine. And I agree with Mr. Blinken, who yesterday said that this is about security, not only in Europe but also in the world. So principles are in the base documents, and USSR and Russia, they agreed to these documents, and they should not take some territories, and there is the statute of UNO, and there is an article concerning this, and Russia wants to enforce their forceful scenarios. And this dialogue, these negotiations, they didn't produce result. So the ultimatums of Putin, of Russia, were not perceived. They were rejected publicly by US and NATO and other countries, and stimulated Finland and Switzerland to consider joining NATO. So by their actions, Russia may bring reverse results. And they have isolation in Russia. They have these external wars with minor losses in order not to disturb Russia's population too much. And based on the results of negotiations, I would like to say that Russia didn't expect to get positive answer to ultimatum, and they want to fix on paper this rejection of the West. And I'm surprised that US and NATO agreed to provide written answer in the nearest weeks. So Russia will fix on paper this answer, and they will say that our hands are clear, and they as they understand it. They believe that they may act as they wish. Unfortunately, in this crossroads of interests is Ukraine, Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine as an entity of European and world security. And we should understand that now this model is being formed, and we should be active participants of this model. There may be three scenarios. I simplify this because there may be many scenarios, but I will tell you about three. First, full-scale offensive of Russia in the territory of Ukraine from one strategic area, some intervention. This is 10% of probability. This is not the main scenario, but there is such a scenario in general staff of Russia. For example, as Vitaly mentioned, they may seize some territories, they may seize Kiev. And why I say 10%, I disagree with Mr. Portnikov about probability of Russia to occupy full territory of Ukraine. I confirm as a person who worked in state structures that they cannot occupy all territory of Ukraine and to carry out efficient control over the territory. I know that you will say that these are different things, but when they develop military operations, they take into account these aspects. I do not say that they do not have military capabilities and to put all the army here. I mean that the losses in the first weeks of such attempts, these losses would not be acceptable for Russia as a price that they pay for the attempt of occupation. Our capabilities are bigger than in 2014. We should not count on sanctions. You cannot implement them in 1 week. For example, SWIFT or embargo, but military capabilities that should increase in the nearest future, they may show this price. Speaking about what Vitaly said, what Mr. Portnikov said, I do not say that Russia does not have such an army that is capable of doing this, but in Ukraine we will create this high price in order to prevent such scenario. But I give 10% of probability to the scenarios because there are some crazy people and because what they say is really crazy. So I leave 10% for this scenario concerning the imperial view. Second scenario is putting the troops back to their barracks and to put these forces back to their barracks. So we see that they bring their troops and carry out military exercises near the border, and in the occupied territories, they want to show that they do not reject scenario of hot phase of war, and this is done to support this fixed written answer in 10 days. In Kremlin and in the foreign ministry, they are really expecting this written answer. Next scenario, we give it 17% of probability. Russia may use this scenario. I believe Russia understands that our scenario of joining NATO is motivated by their action, and they may create a line of defense in the western borders of future NATO that will be joined by Ukraine. And I believe that the next scenario, I believe this is the most probable scenario, 73%. This scenario is connected with the actions of Ukrainian power. When I say Ukrainian power, first of all, this is the head of our armed forces. because they provide orders and directives, and in case of military state, martial law, and we do not have martial law in the country at the moment. And also, not only the head of armed forces, but also people who surround him. So the scenario of standoff, military standoff with Russia, and we have the resources of all the countries. I believe that there is no clear understanding what to do, actually. So the scenario that may look good, some diplomatic actions to reach peace, and wish to look at Putin's eyes, to have this meeting with Putin to find some compromise. This is the scenario that is the most probable in the nearest future. How I see it, Russia has always carried out such negotiations to reach its goals, and the goal is control over Ukraine through controlled territories, through special status, special conditions of trade or economic relations with these parts of the country, special provision of security in these territories, and they believe that we should forget about Crimea. This is not the issue for discussion. Full amnesty, they believe that this is really probable. At the same time, it should be accompanied, as it was before, in situation of relations between Russia and Ukraine. This happened before the hot phase. It may happen if Ukraine reaches this compromise, and Ukraine will show that they are ready to have this internal crisis to cross these red lines that are drawn by part of the society. And our partners in France, Germany, and in US, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France said about it during the assembly that that Ukraine is ready for compromise and for the continuation of the Minsk process. And also Russia may carry out some preventive actions, and these actions, I believe this may be cyber attacks, attacks on critical infrastructure objects by cyber weapons, or they may use other types of weapons without entering territory of Ukraine. And this may be the use of geopolitical and energy situations. They may also disconnect us from electricity supply just in one moment for 3 or 4 days. Or Russia may also break our gas pipeline in their territory. We know how they may do it. It happened in the past, like in the anecdote for example, an official comes to Lavrov and say, "Do not hit New York." Other comes to Lavrov and say, "Do not fire at Brussels." And they say, "Okay, then we will fire at our city." And they may legalize the presence of the military in the territory of the occupied territories. And they may defend those people who hold Russian passports in their territory. So this may be done through CSTO or through other organizations, and we may get Russian peacekeepers in our own territory. Now about long-term prospect. This may happen for years, for tens of years, and we won't be able to enter NATO or join European Union. We will try to overcome this Russian occupation and intervention, and we will focus all our resources on this. I believe this is the most probable scenario, and I believe that Ukrainian power should be more active. We live in two parallel worlds. If you listen to the representatives of power, they say that NATO and US they should improve, and Europe do not support us properly. And I have a question. If this is not only about declarations but about results, I will ask several questions. Why in 2 years we got some new systems of weapons that may be more efficient, missiles, anti sea vessels, weapons. We do not build them. And the Neptune is not working as it should. This is first. Second, we do not have our package of preventive sanctions, no some more hard sanctions. I understand that they want to have negotiations directly with Russia, and I believe that this is a weak position for us. So maybe you should warn what may happen. What will happen if Russia enters our territory? If they strike Ukraine, this may be a cyber attack. We should be able to respond the first day. There should be a package, for example, a break of diplomatic relations. Second, those sanctions adopted by US and Europe, in the majority of cases, they adopted in US. But we should have sanctions against Putin, against military officials of Russia. They should be taken the first day. I am against direct negotiations with Putin. You should envisage economic sanctions. You should be ready to implement them, to have this package not only against Russia, but also against those who support Russian intervention. You should be ready to do all this. I do not want to go into detail. So we provided information about these measures, and we provided them to the government. Now, they naively believe to establish peace in such a way that Putin and Russia will compromise and they will satisfy the wishes, and there will be some peaceful negotiations. But this illusion may cost a lot to us, and these attempts that we will see in the next weeks, this may be even bigger challenge to our economic stability, even a bigger threat than external events. I do not want to make predictions. But following the initiative of our head of the military intelligence, Master Budanov, he said that at the end of January there will be an attack. But I say there won't be an attack in January, taking into account weather and other things. We should look carefully at the dates starting 4th to 15th of January. We should look at them, especially our military commander. Vladimir Zelensky would like to go to Beijing and to meet Putin there. And in couloirs, they speak about this. So what will happen then? If our head commander leaves and he travels together with his team, those who really resolve the issues, if he comes out, there may be Russian provocation during these days about conditions for military operations. This is not, this is about February, up to 15th of February. This is the most difficult period. If there is no active phase of military operation on the ground, then till the summer, we won't have this escalation that may happen at the beginning of February. So after this, there should be decision taken. and there should be symmetrical decision by our partners. In Madrid, there should be decision taken about our country joining NATO. So there should be plan of actions to join NATO. Also, in Congress, there should be support the system NATO Plus that is established by the Republican initiative.
But after intermediary elections to the Congress, they can get this support. After that, we may join the allies of the United States, like New Zealand, like Australia, like Southern Korea, like Israel. We are offered to join this cooperation. And we may write down that this does not conflict to our objective to join NATO, and we can cooperate with those countries. And what was said that we need consolidation inside the country, strengthening of its defense, strengthening the community inside the country. So this is important, not to underestimate the challenges and risks which are in front of us. In case this is adequately estimated, we should hear just another words about the statement that we should be prepared to the worst scenario. What should be done? Perhaps Ms. Klimpur-Tsintsadze would start. I believe that this was discussed sufficiently. Perhaps we would start Q&A session. Yes, those two who have questions, please take the mic and ask your question. Fratkin Mikhailo, this side of News Price Info. I have several questions to the discussion participants. How do you think why in 2021 Putin started to discuss of the non-extension of NATO, while the extension of NATO has been lasting from the year 1999. Why the second? Why Mr. Glushko stated at the press conference that Ukraine would implement Minsk agreements and there would be no offensive. Whether it was an attempt to force Ukraine to implement the Minsk agreements. Maybe this is an attempt to bring Orlov back into Ukraine and then split Ukraine. Then the third question, whether the conflicts between Russia and Finland, Sweden and Baltic countries may happen. And the fourth question is about the restrictions imposed on the weapons. And the last question, why Lavrov has not attended that summit, but the summit was attended by Ryabkov, Grushko, and not by Patrushev, etc. Whether this is a signal that this is because of discrepancies in their positions, but or they wanted to say later that these were not the main figures. The Russian Federation opposed extension of NATO since 1997. I recollect clearly the summit between Russia in Madrid, who clearly stated that Russia Russia would never agree with the NATO extension. This rhetoric had been sounding for a long period of time, but never it was done so aggressively. And the second question, the Russian has been pursuing the clear tactics. If any countries wanted to escape the Russian sphere of influence, they were jeopardizing that country and making it the handicapped country, and with being a handicapped country, so to say, the country could not join NATO, join any Euro-Atlantic structure. This is true about Russia, about Ukraine. This is true about Moldova. This is true about Georgia, because of Ossetia and Abkhazia. Quite recently, in the NATO summit, Joseph Biden answering a direct question whether partial occupation of Ukraine by Russia would hamper Ukraine's accession to NATO. And after that response, when Russia had discovered that the concept that the handicapped country could not become the ally of the NATO doesn't work anymore, they immediately started to interfere into the situation and change their tactics. I would like to add that that's true about Azerbaijan. You may recollect Guam structure, which joined the Black Sea post-Soviet countries. And the same happened to Azerbaijan. Answering your question why we did not see Lavrov at the summit, I believe that this was done intentionally to allow more space for maneuvering, for potential maneuvering in the future. These are two figures who were appointed as negotiators, and later on they might be discredited as abusing the powers, etc., and easily change the tactics in further negotiations. As for the perspectives and prospects, I partially agree with Mr. Portnikov that there might exist 24 of possible scenarios which would be used as alternatives to match better the situation. But for me, this is a sign of short-sightedness, so to say, because the country which thinks strategically, it has more clear plans how to act. But of course, Russian Federation and the Soviet Union had never been a strong strategic players, and this gives us a sort of hope. Now, I would like to pass the microphone to my colleague, but I would like to warn you against too serious concerns, too serious panic. I believe that those people who stay now in Kremlin, they clearly understand the consequences of their strong actions. Russia is not that strong to allow itself to behave this way. We are not in 2014 now. The phenomena and the processes which take place in the economy and in the political life of that of that country is approaching to the boiling point, so to say, and Russia may find itself in a situation when any sharp moves result in the boomerang effect. And you may recollect at this point the trillions of dollars which are withdrawn from Russia and which are kept in the Western world somewhere. And this might be the security lines and the common sense in this situation has chances to prevail, and I put big hopes on our civil society, on its ability to self-organization and to self-mobilization. I would look at what was mentioned, what was asked about Finland, Sweden, and Baltic countries. All of us know that the conflict at the borders last for years now. For example, either the airplanes cross the border or the ships cross the border, or there are provocations at the border, etc. And here again, we face multiple scenarios, and we do not know which one would be chosen by Russia. And I cannot say that one of those scenarios with at the borders of those countries would not be used. And there's multi-optional possibilities for Russia put us in a situation that Russia may strive to reach a situation not via direct military actions against Ukraine, but to do something via Belarus. And we do not know what happened between Belarus and Russia, between French and German military advisors who met with the Russians and with Yermak here in Ukraine. And we do not know whether this will be further steps to stop Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, and the Minsk agreement, which was strongly promoted and which brought Ukrainian authorities to a compromise which is unacceptable for progressive part of Ukrainian society. This now could be used by the West to stop Ukraine, and this will be a good result of all this blackmail for Russia. Thank you. I would like also to add to the colleagues and add about the matters which are important and were not told by now. Finland and Sweden may abstain from immediate accession to NATO. Finland recently had signed a contract for the supplies of aviation equipment because, by the way, they realize that the Russian threat is growing continuously, and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly found that Estonia was the first country who experienced pressure from Russia, and Estonia is a country who had proven that the Russian blows could be done against against any neighboring country. Russia, with its presence or non-presence at the OSCE summit, had proven that they simply ignore the OSCE because they believe it is too weak, that it is not a powerful organization. On the second side, they take the European Union as a weak partner. This was clearly stated by Lavrov, that Mr. Borrell should not get nervous because the European Union had proved that they are weak. And now the European Union has to make decisive steps to prove that they are strong. And this is quite easy, decisive step. Make decision about supplies of defense equipment to Ukraine, and make such a sharp and decisive states. Just demonstrate to Moscow that 500 million of people should be valued, and Russia has economic potential which equals to today's Spain economy, not even the Netherlands. And despite the position of Germany, despite the position of the White House even, the European Union has sufficient leverage to demonstrate that it is strong, irrespectively of the position of other political structure. And I believe that at this stage, when Russia understood that all those ultimatums would not be accepted, they simply sent to negotiations the lower figures, the smaller figures than Lavrov, Patrushev, etc. Those are very important and great figures that they should be taken seriously. Why they should meet with Biden, with Sullivan. And they wanted just to demonstrate that Mr. Borrell was unimportant, that OSCE was unimportant, while NATO, to some extent, we can weight them as a more important organization. This is a very rude behavior, and this is a demonstration of humiliating attitude, actually, and knowing not so much, we can make guesses that behind the closed doors, Ukrainian government keeps negotiations with Mr. Sullivan, with German partners, and I feel that they will make an attempt to bring to the Parliament new laws about amnesty to the militants in the East, the changes in the constitution, and in my opinion, it might be a situation when they will promise to the Western partners to make decisions which are dependent on the Ukrainian parliament. And I'm afraid that at this stage, this threat of the Ukrainian government's promises is very real. But let us recollect Donetsk airport, Debaltseve, Ilovaisk, and then this military attack becomes a reality. And in this situation, the right move should be done. At that time, in 2015, the response which was predicted and reached by Putin, that a signing of the Minsk agreements was assessed as the rescue to Europe, to Ukraine, and to the world. But now, if we agree to all that actions to which we are pushed, this will make us further from a possibility to defend ourselves. Every day we get the news that our military servants are killed in the East. We saw 80 casualties of our military in the East. This is much more than in 2020, and this is under the circumstance of a ceasefire.
That's why I say that this is a long story, and we do not like it. I cannot say that we have a solution, an ideal one, that Ukrainian power, the president, should do some magic things and everything will be resolved. We do not have such illusions. But the number of steps that is made brings us to idea that Putin lacks strategy. At the same time, he has resources for tactical actions. The army, weapons, he has such a resource, but we lack resources, and we have a lot of illusions. And communication, and this communication is not clear, as they say. And I believe that lack of dialogue with the parliament and reporting before Ukrainian parliament about the intentions of the government of the president, and also heads of factions should be present at the meetings of National Defense and Security Council. And there is a weird dialogue with society. Yes, we may speak about scenarios, but the power should not have the right to speak with the people about spectrum of 50 scenarios, because we should move somewhere, we take decisions. That's why there may be declarations concerning the requirements to stop the Nord Stream 2, and this is a clear declaration of the White House, and also Bogdanov says that there will be hot war at the end of January. Others say that the opposition provides such an opinion in order to disturb the country. And there is political chaos, and this weakens the state, the country. Also about the prices and dissatisfaction of population, about problems of social character. This is expected by Russia, and they have forecasts concerning this. And the first phase may be at the beginning of spring, maybe in February. So February, March, April, this is a window of opportunities for them. And Ukrainian power and the Ukrainian government, I believe they underestimate the situation. Let's recognize this. Not only them, but even we speak about scenario full-fledged operation, about Russian tanks. We reject this, but I would like to remind to you that in 2013 we also rejected this idea. Instead of this, we got this in reality in our territory. Use of missiles from Russian territory. I'm not speaking about Crimea, I'm speaking about Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. Subversive groups and regular forces in our territory from Russia. We got rockets, missiles from Russian territory that struck our territory. So this happened and this may be repeated. This is not about 100,000 troops entering, but this is also about efficiency of Putin in this context. He may show that he does what he likes. And for example, I struck and you did nothing. No consequences. Also about red light that should be lit in case of entering into force of these sanctions. Nor in the States, nor in Europe, they have this sanctions that should be entered into force in case of massive offensive or cyber attacks or complex of attacks or some local interferences. I believe that our diplomatic course should work on this issue. And lastly, about what Mr. Lubkivsky said, we shouldn't have illusions about this. For example, there is a meeting of ambassadors, and the servants of People Party say that this is a result of a big work of president concerning the work of Ukrainian diplomacy. This is such an interpretation that is really weird concerning the work of diplomats. I believe that efficiency of diplomacy, and I understand that there is a different situation now. There should be not only diplomacy, there may be also provision of weapons. We should properly work with our foreign partners. Public diplomacy is also of importance. Economic diplomacy should not be top priority. So what about proposals, offers for 277 billion hryvnias and the new plan of the president to attract investment? They came to America and they presented some things to known people, but they didn't do anything. But this was just a bluff. In reality, we see that investment are not going here. So they create a parallel world where everything is okay. And this brings us to the trap of Putin. There should be proper political dialogue. We do not only criticize, we show weak spots. Power should, not only the power, but the parliament, the government altogether, they should close those gaps. The president should be in the European Parliament, or even Stefanchuk should go to European Parliament. The president should also go to the meeting of the Security Council of UN. There is Article 2 concerning forceful actions against sovereignty. Why this issue is not raised? We have powerful diplomacy. We have representative in UNO, and the political leaders should provide him with such a task. In European countries, we should speak about security, defense, and support in different forms. Maximum concentration should be on this. Economy is great, but this is a second priority, and the first one is security, and we do not feel this. Do you feel this, Mr. Minister? A lot has been said, and your question was answered already. I won't add to this list. I believe that the list of scenarios, and I agree with my colleague, it should be provided wonderfully. There are many scenarios. There is no sense to consider all of them. And I believe that there is another aspect I would like to focus on, but really briefly, about non-enlargement, why it was important. There is no proper answer to this question because this is the fact. The position of non-enlargement is one of the principal positions of the Russian Federation throughout many years. But till now, this declaration of attempts to become members of NATO raised such a response. It didn't happen after Verkhovna Rada voted and introduced this aim in the constitution of Ukraine. This didn't happen after the last summit of the alliance. That didn't happen in April when there was accumulation of Russian forces near our borders. This happened only recently. And this issue was actively discussed. Why this topic appeared? Look at the documents that Russia publicly presented to the Western partners blatantly. These documents are not serious documents. This is propaganda and populist documents. This is an approach for domestic audience, in fact. It's clear that this escalation has a series of reasons. Maybe we do not understand them clearly. This may depend on domestic situation and competition of different forces around Putin and proposals of different scenarios. Whether Putin has a decision concerning so-called Ukrainian issue, we believe that he doesn't have it. He has some options that he believes may be used. Military option that we see now, and the intensification of it, and the psychological pressure we've discussed. Also, ideological option. So his latest article and Medvedev's article that Ukraine doesn't have any agency, that there is no Ukrainian people, that they are the same as Russians, and also this is ideological issues that are included into educational narrative. They will bring up children using these narratives. This issue cannot be resolved operatively now, and even in tens of years ahead. The only thing that situation in Russia may change, but this is not probable. So Russia also intensified its actions due to some reasons connected with maybe improvement of our weapons, also due to some internal calculations, and Russia preserves many options in its policy. The main conclusion we may reach, this is conclusion for Ukraine itself. Now we have opportunity to prove that we are participants of big European security space and we are capable of contributing to it. But we should have active diplomacy directed at results, not at imitation. And Ambassador Charlie mentioned about the economization of foreign policy and foreign diplomacy. And from times of Kuchma, and I compared recently the speeches of the presidents, Zelensky's speech and Yanukovych when he was not a president yet. So, and Yushchenko, everything was about economization of foreign policy and that the ambassador should bring investment and that this is not efficient. We need real diplomacy, especially in these difficult times. One sentence from me. We have time till 2. I agree with Danila in all, but now I would like to disagree with him. Danila, the matter is, Russia does not have a perspective of many generations. There was one more question from our colleagues. Please be brief. Everything has been said. Maybe the last question. I will be brief. A lot has been said. Vladimir and Valery, they said that the best means of protection against Russia, this is not sanctions, but this is defense weapons. We have moral and legal right to demand to have nuclear or conventional weapons, and Valery today said that in the Congress of US they submitted a document about NATO Plus, and also there is meeting of ambassadors. Do you believe we have chance in Ukraine to use this moment to have an opportunity to get nuclear or conventional weapons? This is to Vladimir. About nuclear weapons, I believe this is not realistic. So we may say that you took it from us, please give us something to replace it as an alternative. Whether we may use the situation, of course we can. If you compare the position of the West, of collective West, in 2008 or 2014 or 2021, the position is seriously different. This is a chance for us. And I agree with my colleagues fully that now we have a very important moment for our diplomacy to implement these things. And I fully agree that in order to implement it, we should understand what and how we should do. And we attended one meeting with Valery, and they said that we should have strategic planning in order that the diplomats understand what they should do. They are working in different countries. In one country, you should say A. In another country, you should say B. And this is the work of diplomats, and there is work of different officials, heads of committees. This is a multi-layered system that should work as one mechanism. This is like a conductor and an orchestra. Otherwise, there will be cacophony. And if the conductor understands what everyone should do, then we applaud, because this is wonderful. I believe that this is a key problem. We should have one conductor that clearly hears good and bad note and does everything in order not to have these bad notes. Now about nuclear weapons. This is another story. We won't return it. This is not realistic. Let's recognize this. This train has passed already. About high-precision weapons. So we are speaking about these types. They won't give it to us. This is our domestic capabilities, our missiles technology. Yes, we have them. Also anti-vessel land missiles. Yes, we have them. The paradox of the situation is that despite such a tension and Russian attack, many countries and specialists in the West do not want to give us missiles that reach Russian territory, Moscow, and this is the matter of deterrence. So we have not many supporters in this. Only our neighbors support us in this. Big countries, they do not want us to be developed in this area. And if they close doors to NATO for us, we won't have any other options. We will build our defense ourselves and will create high-precision weapons, and this should be top priority for the country. These are huge resources. It will be difficult for us to do this economically, but if we are alone against Russia without NATO and partnership, this will be the only way for us. That's why I do not expect for the spirit in the future. We should increase our missiles programs. So we have two parallel worlds. Yesterday they launched Ukrainian Siege-2 satellite. For tens of years we have been preparing it. And the power said that Ukrainian satellite is in the orbit. There are 104 satellites that were launched. And the alternative projects, we have them in Ukraine, not 7 pixels, but more. And they see not only vessels, but also they see tanks. I won't go into detail, but we should have a lot of projects like this, not only Siege project and the Pivden state enterprise, they made it, but with Polytechnic Institute, they developed many projects. I visited US and I went to the Missouri University, then I went to Georgia University, and they all make drones. And they have state program. 17 universities compete for the best design of the drone. And they understood that they need different programs. So this is not about 99 billion hryvnias for the Ministry of Defense. And the power says that this is a huge figure to support defense. Sorry, but Patriot system, for example, one Patriot system, 27 billion hryvnias, and 20 million is provided by US yearly, but this is not enough. If we seriously hope to prevent war, in the nearest 4 months maximum, we should show Russia that we are now more powerful. This should have been done before, because the main supplies of Ireland from US Mark 6 these programs concerning javelins, radio stations, vessel equipment, this was all done in 2018, 2019. Do we have changes in 2 years? No. And these things, they are planned not for 1 year, but for 2 or 3 years. And I do not want to say even about what was planned in 2018. 2 serious projects were stopped because there were some lobbyists, some companies in US. And 2 years of previous work were lost when other companies came and they need 2 years to get prepared. I believe this is the mistake of our power. This is a big problem. They do not understand that these things are done not only by the president and the government. This is done continuously despite internal battles. Defense projects, security projects, after political standoffs, they are promoted for years, for tens of years. Now we have also the issues concerning destroyers. We need to replace the fleet. And do you know about some accumulation of resources for this? And I know a lot about billions for roads. I do not say whether it is good or bad. Yes, this is good, but I know about the money concerning roads, about bribes in this area. But what about defense? Maybe we should put this issue into priority, so we should speak about it. For example, Neptune system or other new system. It should be mentioned by Zelensky in his speech, for example, that we may reach Moscow. If they strike, we will strike back. Why we do not have such declarations? Because there are no technical capabilities. Honestly speaking, I fear our domestic inability to be ready to respond. So in Russia, they have some distorted system of coordinates, but we believe that we have people here, especially our veterans, who are capable to fight. Our people are capable to stand against tanks and conventional weapons of fourth generation. But how can we counteract cyber attacks? In this center, we are trying to dismantle myths. But what about cyber attacks? Do we have cyber forces? Do we have good cooperation with US and with other countries? But do we have capabilities to respond in case of attack against Ukraine? So there are many issues that should be discussed during our next meetings. And Vitaly, would you like to add?
Thank you for joining us. Vitaly would like to add. I would like to bring us to the earth from heaven. In October 1973, Arabic countries had attacked Israel, who had 15 nuclear powerheads. Nuclear weapon is not a guarantee. This only means that the nuclear powers have a war between them. They simply are able to use nuclear weapon, and not have a nuclear weapon does not actually mean that we may use them. These are just assumptions which would never come true. true. Nuclear weapon is not a weapon which defend you from a military offensive or invasion. Russia most probably would not use nuclear weapon against Ukraine. India and Pakistan are nuclear powers, and nevertheless they have military conflicts continuously between them. Please do not make assumptions that Russia wants Ardlaw to come back to Ukraine. Don't be afraid that this may happen. Russia clearly understands that as soon as Ardlaw is brought back to Ukraine and Renat Akhmetov with his business come there, he would be served with its powers too. Russia never gives back the territories which it invades. Please forget about restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity unless Mr. Putin will get a successor. We should learn how to exist as a state with the occupied territories. Look at the northern Cyprus. And nobody will give us anything back. These speculations about law, about Minsk agreements, about Steinmeier formula, these are all the statements which are clearly used to destabilize Ukraine. Russia gave hundreds of thousands of passports in Ardlaw. Leaders of Ardlaw are recognized and participate in the discussions in Kremlin, etc. But why they do not join? Because this is their strategy. They do not take Transnistria, they do not take Northern Caucasus, and they do not take Eastern republics. And the final statement. We have to learn how to exist in this multi-optional world and to have illusions that our power would become more adequate, so to say. Since Russia has inadequate people in power, why should we have adequate people in power? And we have to learn how to exist in this world with this. But for resilience, we need community which is strongly united. We need solidarity in the community. Vitaly suggested one version why in this very moment Putin started discussions with the alliance. Danilo suggested another version of the reasons, but I believe that this is because he observed that we are getting weaker. We had cut down our military supplies to the armed forces, etc. And Putin decided that this is the right moment to take action. About cybersecurity, I believe that we have to learn very serious lessons. Why having such high risks in the cyberspace when witnessing such intensive cyber attacks from Russian Federation? We have to understand why the Ukrainian government makes intensive attempts to bring the whole country to smartphone. This looks like an intentional subversive actions, actually. And I believe that unless the dialogue between the West and Russia is finished, we should use each moment of such dialogue to strengthen our resilience. Thank you, dear friends. We exhausted our time limits and we have heard very meaningful interventions from all our speakers, very meaningful analysis. For those who had an opportunity to watch us from the very beginning, you may use